Welcome to Relationship Equity, a podcast that explores how successful people cultivate meaningful connections with others in their personal and professional lives. Learn from the stories, insights, and advice of leaders, innovators, and influencers who have built strong bonds with their teams, their customers, their communities, and their families. Here's Richard Walker.
I'm back with Sandra Matz, Columbia Business School professor and author of Mind Masters. We've been discussing the concept of psychological targeting and how modern technology allows for the analysis of digital footprints to predict and potentially influence human behavior, drawing parallels to our experiences growing up in a small German village. So Sandra, let's get back to the topic of leadership. How does a senior leader maintain credibility by having people on their team who are smarter than them, yet still be viewed and respected as the leader? What does smarter really mean in this context?
It also it depends on the context, right? So I think what good leaders do is they set the stage. So I think good leaders say, here's the vision that I have. Here's the goal that I think we should be working towards. And here's the reason. And maybe you even involve the team in coming up with that vision. And then everybody contributes their expertise. And I think the more that you manage to set up that vision in the beginning, the more everybody can contribute with the expertise without them having the impression that you don't know what you're doing, right? Because you're still in charge of the process. So I think that's, it's again, something that we're typically not taught in our education. Nobody takes you to the side and teaches you how do you craft your vision for the next 10, 15 years as a leader? How do you craft your vision for how your team is supposed to work together? But that's, I think, what makes you look incredibly competent without having to know the nitty-gritty details of every single part of the process.
Completely agree. Now, you said something else which is important about, and this is an old adage, it's who do you know? I agree with that. But let me add to that. It's who knows you? Whose radar are you on? Who are you impressing? And that's so important. I talked about that in my book as well, and I won't bore you with the story. But creating the right relationships and authentic relationships and being intentional about it. Let's talk about that, because with your research, everything you've done, human dynamics with how to create meaningful relationships, because people know if it's false, people know if you've got a personal agenda. How do you create meaningful relationships where there's mutual respect for each other? How do you do that, especially in the corporate setting?
Yeah, I'm not sure if my research can speak to this, even though I'm going to get there in a second, because I do think that there's actually a lot that companies could do with the data that they have about employees to better understand what they want, right? I think there's such a heavy focus on trying to understand your customer and what does the customer want, segmenting them and figuring out exactly how did you target them with the right message at the right time. A little bit similar to what you just described. We barely ever try to do the same thing for employees. But I think the number one trait that I actually think people need when it comes to building these authentic relationships is curiosity. I think curiosity drives so much of if I'm genuinely curious about who you are, where you come from, what you want, that then creates perspective taking, it creates empathy, it creates compassion. So I feel like this base level of being curious about other people is driving so many of the good other traits that come with it.
Genuine curiosity. I couldn't agree more with you. Let's face it, some people are genuinely curious. I always have been. I'm fascinated by the world and by people. So I always ask questions. I always want to know people's stories. I am genuinely curious. But I've said this for years, Sandra, you can tell a lot about people by the questions they ask. And if you think about interviewing, when people are an applicant, an interviewee, they go into an interview, they think it's about answering questions. Well, of course it is. But to me, the person who I typically hire is the person who typically gets the job is because of the questions they ask. Because in any given situation, to really understand what the problem is you're trying to solve, you have to ask the right questions and not just surface level questions, because often the truth is 5 levels down. So you have to be
able.
And
they might not even know, right?
They
so
might not
like
even
you
know.
ask the right question, you also get to the bottom of something that they might just not have figured out themselves.
100%. Okay, let's switch gears. But I want to know more about your book. Why, your purpose of writing it. Why did you write the book? And who should read it? Apart from everybody on earth, who should read it?
Everything. So ask my publisher, and I think the probably answer is everybody. But again, it's so funny because it goes back to the village in a way. So I didn't even want to write a book. I started writing these stories for my parents and my friends because I wanted them to like understand what I was doing and like research far away from home. And they don't care about the papers, right? So we spend so much time publishing these papers, perfecting them. They go through peer review. It takes years. And then it's like a very formulaic and nobody understands them. So I just started writing these stories so that my parents could get excited. And hopefully also, I think there were two reasons. One is that I wanted them to get excited about the work I was doing. And the second was that I also wanted them to care a little bit more about their personal data. Because I think it's like we almost stand no chance. I think the way that the data ecosystem is currently set up, right? So you can, like, everybody can grab your data very easily. If you really wanted to manage it, you'd have to read the terms and conditions of all of the services. You would have to say goodbye to his family dinners and family vacation because it's a 24/7 full-time job if you wanted to manage it properly. So I kind of wrote it to tell this story of here's how intimate your data really is. Here's what is actually good and bad about it. So here's some opportunities, and I can talk about this in just a second. And here's how I think we should manage it. And the managing part is, I think the idea, or like the way that I discuss it in the book, is also coming back to this notion of community and a village. So like the solution that I suggest when it comes to how do we benefit from our data without necessarily giving up all this privacy and self-control is these new forms of data governance. And now it's going to get a little bit geeky. You have to bear with me for a second. It's essentially what is called data co-ops. Like it's a community of people who have a shared interest in using their data. My favorite example these days is pregnant ladies, expecting moms, who want to know what should I do to make sure that I'm healthy and the baby is healthy. And the way that it currently works is terrible, right? So you go to your doctor every 4 weeks. You have no idea. They give you some general advice. If you have morning sickness, go chew on some ginger candy. And I'm like, it's not working. So there's an amazing opportunity to say, let's get pregnant ladies together. Let's share our genetic data, medical histories, lifestyle data, our biometric data, and then see and figure out, well, with this certain lifestyle, these genetic markers, here's what you should be paying attention to. Maybe that's nutrition. Maybe that's like physical activity, but it's very specific to you. Now, we could also technically give this data to pharma companies and then just hope for the best. But what's so nice about these data co-ops is that they're owned by their members. So it's essentially, if I'm part of a data co-op for like pregnant ladies again, and I own part of that entity, and the same thing that we do in the financial services industry, and the data co-op has fiduciary responsibility. So they're legally obligated to act in my best interest. And that's a total game changer, right? Because suddenly we have someone we can hire, for example, management that knows exactly how to handle the data, what's difficult about it, and who could they reach out to make sure that we get the best insight. So that's one way that I actually learned from growing up in the village. So like this village that I grew up in was in like a region that has a lot of vineyards. So when I was young, my parents still had like this tiny pocket of vineyards, and we would go every fall to harvest the grapes. It was amazing as a kid and a lot of work as a teenager. But we didn't make our own wine, right? So it was way too small. We didn't know how to do it. And what happens in these regions is that you have these wine co-ops. So like a lot of families have like little parcels and they collect all of the grapes. And now either because you're many, many people and you have a lot more grapes, you can sell them at a higher price to other wineries who then produce the wine, or you can hire experts who know how to make wine because you, again, have like this community of people who have the same interest. So that's kind of how I think about data in the book. This is a long answer to your question, but it all kind of comes back to this notion of like community, village. How do we amplify the positives that the village brought in terms of supporting us fulfill our dreams and mitigate some of the manipulative parts of it?
What you're talking about is fascinating to me. As I look at the different companies that I've worked with over many, many years, and I look at the most successful ones, the word that jumps out is there is a feeling of community in the organization. There's a feeling of togetherness. I mean, the book I wrote on relationship equity, we have a lot of similarities. By the way, I love the Black Forest area. I've been down there, and you grew up in a beautiful part of the world. And when you grow up in a small place, I think you have a kind of a different perspective of the world than if you grow up in a big place, not right or wrong, just different. And I have a very similar perspective to you in that I grew up in a very small town. In the first 6 years of my working life, I was a bricklayer. And that was what I was supposed to do, either one of the factories or on the farm or one of the building sites. I went to the building site and I learned a lot about people. And I learned a lot of what we've learned, to me, is subconscious. There's conscious learning where you get a book, or you look at a YouTube, or you watch a TED Talk, or you go and listen to a professor like you and you learn. But so much of what we learn is subconscious. Every interaction we have, every experience we have, our brain logs it. And I can't tell you how many times something's been logged in the back of my mind. I mean, I can't remember what I have for breakfast every day, but I'll pull back something from 40 years ago that I learned on the building site that I now use today. So experiences, the more experiences we have, the better it is. But it's how do we use the information and experiences that we have? And as I look at successful companies, it's truly about inspiring and leading and connecting people and putting the right teams together. If you put the right teams together that work together, and it's an awfully easy thing to say, but it's a damn difficult thing to do. But it's hard to do because it's not just a match of technical skills, it's a match of personalities. And I'll give you an example, Sandra. I was brought in by a CIO many years ago, because she said, my team, 32 people, 32 leaders, they're all fighting. And I can't, why? Can you come in and help me? So I came in and I went through. Now, this is, before AI, and this is before really technology could have helped me differently today than it did back then. But the first thing I did is I had to do a disc profile of everybody. Well, guess what? They were all the same profile. They were all DIs. They all wanted to be right. They were all fighting with each other. She didn't have a mix, because one of the things we talk about with our Lead to Leadership program, if you're going to put a team together, would you rather have, the D stands for dominance, and I influence, S steadiness, and C conscientiousness? Would you rather have a team of all Ds, all Is, all S's, all C's? Or would you like to have a combination? Well, everybody says, well, a combination, of course, and that's the right answer. But unless there's mutual respect for how people think differently, that's when problems come in. If there's respect that, the D's are driving hard and they want to get results, and the I's, the collaborators, and they want to influence it in a slightly different way, and the S's, they steady things down, and the C's, they're very conscientious and very detail-oriented. Unless we do an exercise, and once people understand how and why people think differently, then they go, oh, I get it now. I get why you were slowing me down. I was going fast. I didn't have all the information I needed. But if you don't know that, then guess what happens? People fight.
And that's so interesting, because I think, again, this comes back to leadership on some level. Like, the moment that I think you have this very clear vision of, like, here's what we're trying to accomplish as a team, and you give people the space and you kind of communicate properly, then you can overcome some of these things. It's actually ongoing work that I'm doing, which is very much related to what you were saying. We're looking at how do you make diversity work, right? So I think there's a pretty big push, and I think rightfully so, to diversify the workforce. Now, the problem is, unsurprisingly, it doesn't just work by putting people who think differently and look differently just in the same place and then magically expect it to work.
Right.
You kind of need to do a little bit of your job to say, okay, how do we actually listen to the different perspectives? Because if I hate your gut because you think differently, I'm not going to listen to your great new perspective on how to drive change, for example. So there's what we find is that the highest performing teams are actually the ones that have some functional diversity. So they come from different backgrounds. They also kind of have some socio-demographic diversity, but they manage to create something that we call shared reality. So they kind of manage to get on the same page, look at something external and say, oh yeah, actually it clicks, and we kind of think about this in the same way. And that really kind of requires leadership, right? So that you can create it as a team, it's just much harder. So once you kind of have a leader that has this clear vision and also clear understanding of what the strengths of the individual team members are, it's much easier.
Couldn't agree more.
Then it's not just like this, oh my God, we constantly are in each other's hair.
I could talk with you for about 14 million years straight. I love your background. I love who you are. I love how you think. And I think you are changing the world with what you're doing. And I've got one last question for you that I want to hit you with, a kind of a zinger. I want you to get your crystal ball out. And I want you to tell me what you see in the future, next 5 years, next 10 years, next 20, 50 years, with how technology, specifically AI, how it's going to change the world in terms of relationships, human dynamics. How do you think it will? That's a big question to answer, I know, because Nobody knows, but we've seen the shift. We've seen what's happened, and AI's been around for a long time. But there's through my eyes, I see a big shift that's happened in the last couple of years with the AI really now being taken very seriously. Because I'll give you one little opinion of mine, but I'll give you a chance to think about your answer. Is, to me, it's the companies and the people who truly embrace AI and use it correctly, and I stress use it correctly, they're the ones that will win. They're the ones that will win if they really, because let's face it, it's a massive tool. Now, when I was back on the building site when I was a kid, I used to use a jackhammer to bust up, concrete and what have you. If I use that jackhammer incorrectly, I'm going to blow my own foot off. Now, you take that concept into the business world. If people don't use it correctly, the companies are going to implode. But for the ones that do use it correctly, I think they're going to be the ones that overall win. So I'll let you answer the question now. How do you see AI and technology impacting the world and the corporate world over the next 5, 10, 15, 100 years?
So it's funny because I think about this very similarly. So like the way that I talk about it in the book and have been thinking about it for the last, let's say, 5 years is like in these what if questions. Is like if I can use it again to exploit teenagers suffering from mental health and anxiety, right. I can also use it to help them get better. So I think you can, for almost any nefarious purpose, you can find a good use case. And I agree that the ones who are going to win are the ones embracing it. Now, I'm going to give you my slightly dystopian glimpse into the future, which I want to put out there so that we can do something about it. But there's a lot of, everything that I've done so far was trying to understand human mind, human psychology from the outside, right? So I take a look at people's data and I make predictions about who they are, and that gives me a way to influence their behaviors. I think of it as like reading and writing into the mind. There's a lot of companies now working on putting AI into your brain directly, right? So Neuralink, Elon Musk is putting a lot of money behind the idea that we actually know how to speak the language of the brain. So my husband is a neuroscientist. We know how to read like your mind, and we also know how to write into the mind. What's stopping us right now is essentially the fact that it's hard to get chips inside the brain, and that there's like no legal framework to do that unless you actually suffer from something like epilepsy. There's like a lot of people, thousands of people in the US that run around with a chip already in their brain that is kind of trying to help them gain back functionality. But once we integrate AI directly into the brain, there's so many questions about like human relationship. Like, can you still trust the memories? Can you still trust the thoughts that you have, right? Are you sure that they're originating from your own mind, or did someone plant them there? So that is like one question. Think about like the way that the gap is now widening when it comes to socioeconomic status. So this is already kind of getting bigger right now. Once we have some people with a chip in their brain who can just access Google by thinking a thought, like we just become two different species, right? So the next, like if this in 50 years, the person with AI in their brain kind of looks at us and they're like, oh, look at these cute little monkeys playing in the playground. And because they're just going to be so outsmarting us, and we're kind of creating this. I'm worried about AI being integrated directly into the brain such that it creates huge levels of inequality that are very hard to bridge from a societal relational point of view. That's I wish I had like something that is like a lot more optimistic, but I do think it's worth having a conversation and thinking about right now, because I do think now there's something we can do about it if we don't want to end up there.
Well, I can't thank you enough for your time. Congratulations on your book. It's been I had 118 questions. I think I asked you 2 of them, but I'm looking forward to reconnecting after this, because I think we've got a lot in common and I can learn a lot from you. And I think we're going to have some fun going forward. So thank you very much, Sandra. Where are you, by the way, right now?
I'm currently in Barcelona. I'm still on parental leave until the end of the year.
Well, congratulations. And thank you very much again, Sandra. Well, congratulations. And thank you very much again, Sandra.
This has been Relationship Equity. If you want to take your career, your business, or your personal relationships to the next level, reach out to Richard at yorksolutions.net. You can also get Richard's book, Relationship Equity, your cornerstone investment to great gains in business and life, on Amazon now. Relationship Equity with Richard Walker is a production of Forbes Books.